Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Nevers. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we are dealing with the aftermath of the last episode, and everyone from the orphanage is burying Mary. The only one who's not at the funeral is Amalia, and even Mundy is, but there's people nearby, a group known as like the Purists. They kind of wear like these like lavender color ribbons, kind of being like people who are just all about like, yeah, like anti-touched, we're pure, we're. I think that's what they're supposed to represent and stuff like that. Mundy was about to get pissed, but penance, and it's kind of a message she has throughout the entire episode. Violence begets more violence. It's like in a situation like this, us responding with violence is just going to make people hate us and fear us even more. So let's not give, because even Bonfire Annie being like, yo, like that might have actually been the reason why they killed Mary, to kind of push us into doing something stupid that's just going to like backfire on us and turn us into public enemy number one. We're already just like feared, anyway. We go on a rampage, that's just going to lean into it more. But basically we see Amalia kind of getting drunk. Granted, it seems like all that was part of a point, because like she gets close to the dude who plays with the fiddle, but that's like connected to the Beggar King. But it's like, because she made it clear last episode too that like she's like, oh yeah, like I kind of have like random hookups. I think it's just her way to kind of compensate with a lot of stuff. In this particular case too, because she has a lot of guilt. Because even Mundy threw it out there when he was talking to Penance. It's like, even with her ability to see the future, it's like she didn't see this coming. It's like, sadly, her powers don't work that way. Like, she gets small glimpses, and she can't control when the ripples kick in and what they decide to show her. So it's like, even with her powers and everything, her being the kind of pseudo de facto leader to this group, she wasn't able to see this coming, and Mary died because of it. So she's internalizing a lot of own self-hatred in this regard. So obviously, back at the orphanage, obviously a lot of people are just kind of adjusting to the circumstances, the new place and everything. And Bonfire is at, Amalia's desk, and Horatio walks in, and she's like, oh, like the leader didn't even show up at the funeral. It's like, hell, I was part of the group that kidnapped her, and hell, I managed to show up at Mary's funeral. But Horatio's kind of saying like, Amalia doesn't always kind of do what she should do necessarily, but saying like, hey, if you want to, like, you can try and fight her if you want this job, but truth be told is, you don't want it because you don't want to carry what she has to carry. And so Amalia ends up entering the room being like, hey, I know you basically been talking shit. It's like, it's fine. The fact of the matter is, she's been off trying to figure everything out, because it's like the attack sheet, what happened to her being attacked, and Mary being attacked. Obviously it's a long list of like, well, suspects on potentially who's on the list. So obviously it's like Lucy, Penance, Bonfire, and Horatio, and Amalia. I guess they're kind of like the core like council. I guess these are the people, the inner circle that Amalia kind of trusts the most to kind of get stuff done. Because initially Amalia's kind of suggesting like whoever was not at the funeral should be, or rather who wasn't at the park at the time, kind of suggests that it was someone like who wasn't someone there should have been, kind of shows that this might have been an inside job, because like very few people knew where Mary was going to be and everything. But it was this interesting conversation as Amalia is like walking up the stairs, and Penance is talking to her about like pain and everything. And for Amalia, it's like, I can't cry. Like, that's not going to do Mary any good. But obviously it's like, you going after this, it's like, this isn't justice. It's just going to be you getting revenge. You need to kind of take time. But like, and then like Amalia says something really interesting, which was basically like, there is no time. Like on my planet, I mean, not my planet, but she said like, where I'm from, there's no time or ground, not enough ground to bury anyone, so you don't really have that many funerals. And so for her, it's like, she's like, I was left with this mission I wasn't even ordered or asked to take upon. I just was given this mission, and the fact is, it's like, I was left behind, and it's like, where are the others? They fucked off, or maybe they're dead. She's like, I don't know. But she was saying like, now I'm in a place where like women can't voice their opinion. And so like, my immediate thought was in that moment, because I had to rewind it over and over again, I was like, wait, are we confirming like she's not human? Because it's the thing I brought up in the first episode, like, because Amalia's circumstances always seemed way different than any other touched person's circumstances. But once again, the line that stuck out to me in the first episode, when she leaned against the Beggar King's blade and said, this isn't my face, I was like, what the fuck does that mean? So that's what's like, So is the real Amalia, like whoever she was before, the Amalia that went into that water died, and the person that came out is who or whatever is in that was in that spaceship. Like that's why I'm like, maybe everyone else, maybe because Amalia's circumstances are different, whereas everyone else was alive and conscious and stuff like that. So when they got like possessed by that, it just gave them the ability that basically maybe it's kind of implying like the touch, the power, and everything is a being inside of them, but because they're alive, like either that being subconscious is buried and dead, and maybe like when Amalia was in the water, the real her died, and like whatever species possessed her body, hence why it was like, this isn't my face. Because the thing is, the only person that remembers what went down that day is Malady, because she's, I guess because in her mind it's like, I'm chosen, but maybe it's just because legitimately she's crazy and her mind is so fractured that once again, like that protected her from having her memory wiped, because no one else remembers that day. It's like literally we as the audience know it was an alien spaceship. It wasn't some invading country as like Lord Maston wants to believe, like, oh, it's like someone coming to challenge the Empire basically released a plague on our world, and like these, and kind of led to the Dutch. We'll get to that later on, but I think it straight up is freaking aliens, and I think Amalia is a conscious alien inside, because the real Amalia died, and so all that's left, but it's like maybe her memories warp, and that's also the question I have, like, does Horatio know? Does Penance know the truth? Because there was also that conversation with the Malady where it's like, maybe Malady's craziness is because she's split between being Malady, like the one that's all about religion and stuff like that, and then like the thing that's potentially inside of her body, the other consciousness that is like this alien. That's where my thought is. I could be 100% wrong. Like maybe someone was like, you idiot, they've been laying the groundwork the entire time. I feel like that discussion between Amalia and Penance is the first full-blown, like almost confirmation that she's not human, or at least her body's human, but who she is on the inside isn't human. So that's where I'm like, I don't know if I'm reading too much into that or not, but like I said, I had to rewind it over and over again. So I'm like, am I hearing this correctly? Why is Penance not reacting differently from hearing that? Is it just because she's legitimately taking it as like, oh, you're from a different place, not like you're from a different planet? Or is it because Penance is one of the few people that does know the truth? So that's why I'm like, that's one of the things where like, it's one of those things probably like rewatching the entire season as a whole, it probably would click better in place. But since we're getting it episode to episode, week after week, it's probably like enough time and space where I'm like not clicking all the pieces together, But some other interesting things that went down is like, for example, Myrtle is trying to get a message across. I was trying to remember. Primrose is the tall girl, touched, and it turns out Myrtle, like Mary's song, there's actually translation to it. They didn't go into the ins and outs of it. My initial thought was like, what is a song but melodies? And melodies are just like a different language, and Myrtle like speaks different language. So I was thinking like maybe she was able to tune into it because she can hear and understand so many different languages, and like music in its own, it's a language within its own right. Because what is music but nothing but a whole bunch of like sounds and notes put together? So like maybe it translates a little differently for Mary's song. And I thought that was such a neat aspect of the episode, because you had Harriet literally gathering up so many people who speak different languages. So like as Myrtle's trying to explain it, she's speaking different languages, but people are slowly piecing it together. It's like, I got this part of the message, yada, so on and so forth. So it's like a little side project the entire episode. So I thought that was such an interesting element to it. I was like, that's so cool. Like I said, they never went into the specifics, but that was how I justified it. But maybe it's because legitimately the song Mary was singing, because we're potentially dealing with aliens, was just legitimately in a different language. It was in the form of just a song, so people didn't really think much of it, but it's like there are actual lyrics, there are words to that song, there's a message there, and Myrtle was able to hear it because of her touch. She's able to know every language. Potentially it might be like not just like every earth-based language, or maybe like this particular language and that Mary was singing. Maybe it's tuned because Mary's human, maybe because and maybe the touch ability just tuned her song to resonate with across every human frequency, in the sense of like, frequency isn't the right word, but across every language. That's why it's like maybe it's like a combination of every language or something, or maybe it's like its own, whatever the case may be. Myrtle can kind of understand any language, whether it's like an alien language or, like I said, maybe it's some combination of every language, whatever the case may be. So there's a big conversation between, like I said, like our little council at the orphanage being like, okay, long list of people. Obviously, Penance being like, we can't just like kill people. Let's not go down the violent route. So it's like, all right, Annie, you go deal with the Beggar King. Lucy's going to go look into some like stuff. I'm going to go see Lord Mansa because I had a ripple about him. And Amalia, Penance, you're going to go see Augustus. And it's like, obviously she hasn't seen Augustus since like the party and everything. So she's kind of bad mouthing him a little bit. But it's like, oh, why don't I go like do what Annie's doing? It's like, and Annie's like the potentially dealing with the killers. So it's like, everyone kind of goes their separate ways when it comes to this thing. Because once again, whoever this was had such enough power and influence. Because Horatio was talking about the fact is of like, obviously the family. I don't know if he was saying that the Bidlows were, or whether he was just talking about the family in general that sponsored him. When he initially came here from Jamaica, he was like being in a household for like a week. He's like, I wanted to swim back to Jamaica. I don't think he was saying the Bidlows in particular, but he was trying to say like basically families of that high caliber. Like, yeah, she might have the best of intention, but that's like, she is not one of us, meaning she isn't 100% a friend. So yeah, she's on the list, Lavinia. So obviously we have Penance going to visit him, Augustus, and he's like, excited to see. I thought it was interesting because, like, I think he's testing his powers more because there were actually a whole bunch of birds that were flying into a formation, and the once Penance showed up, they all went separate. So it might not just be one bird. Like, he might be able to control multiple birds at a time. But I thought what was interesting is, like, Penance is, like, recording it with her device and everything, and she's like, damn fucking prototype, because they're having two different conversations. He's talking about the party. She's thinking, like, oh, you murdered Mary, and he was like, oh, it's because my sister wanted me to. It's like, what? And it's like, oh no, I had nothing to do with Mary's death. And it's like realizing like, oh, you're actually the one who sent the flowers and everything. And so he's trying to make an apology. He's like, I want to be acquaintance. He's like, you know what? No, I want to become your friend. He's like, because at first he's like, I want you to forget that day at the party. And she's like, that I can't. And it's like, he's like, you know what? No, I need to earn like being your friend again and stuff like that. So because Penance is kind of like, she's not really used to being around guy. Like, Augustus says friends, but I wonder, does he want there to be more? But at the very least, he wants to have her as a friend. Because I don't think Augustus has a lot of friends, like other than Lavinia, which I mean, it's like that doesn't count because that's your sister and she can be controlling. He has Hugo. Hugo's not really the best person, so which we'll get to that soon enough. But like Penance, I love the whole thing of like, well, if you didn't do it, do you think your sister Lavinia could have done it? And it was like, wait, what? And then it's just like the scene ends. But since I brought him up, it's a whole situation with Mundy, confronting those purists or whatever. And I love the whole thing of like, enters the ring, the ape. And it's like, wait, what? Frank Mundy, the ape? And it's like, yeah. And the dude was like, no, I'm good. You win. It's like, yeah, we'll give you the information. It's like, oh, so Frank's a boxer. He's a well-known boxer that, like, I guess, jack people up there. No. Because it's like, oh, like, it's like, Monday was like, yo, if you want to, like, tussle, we can tussle. Because he's like, yeah, I can have you arrested for actually assaulting an officer. It's like, all right. They're like, oh, like, if we kind of beat your ass, at the very least, we get locked up for it. But it's like, wait, you're the ape? Never mind. It turns out there's a card that told them where to show up at the funeral and has a swan on it, so he immediately attacks Hugo. Which also, that's a whole thing. I think that's supposed to show like the rich and privilege of like they're literally playing chess with cheese. But Monday confronts him because it's like your whole goal was to try and convince everyone from the orphanage to come join your ferryman's club and stuff like that. But he's like, honestly, why would I kill Mary? Like, there'd be no point to that. Saying like, oh, someone's trying to frame me and stuff like that. Points you, and they pulled the trigger and they pointed you my direction. But saying that he had nothing to do with it. But Frank kind of made it clear, like, I'm at the point where I don't care. So nothing between us. It's like whatever business arrangement we have, whatever my debt was to you, it's over because now you're dealing with me where I have nothing. I don't care. Like, I lost someone important to me. I'm pissed. I don't care. Whatever the ramifications are going to be, whatever you want to throw at me, I don't care. And that should be scary to you. So he just kind of bounces afterwards. But then, like, when it gets back to the police station and everything, Melody's there choking out their captain. Whether she actually killed him or not, it's like he wasn't moving later, so I don't know. She might have actually held on enough to kill him. But for her, it's like, oh, lies are being spread about her being the one that killed Mary. And, you know, he's trying to convince her, like, you know, because she's saying, like, yeah, I might have did what I did to Mary, but, like, I would never hurt Mary. Like, for him, it's like, she's like, I only kill angels. And, yeah, you know, me and Mary had a complicated thing because it was like, you were going to hang her afterwards. It's like, well, you know, whatever the fact may be. But it's like, you're going to tell the truth. And Monday's like, yeah, I will. I'll get the truth out there that you had nothing to do with it. So, but he ends up chasing her down, and I thought that was interesting because, like, obviously the way her fights with Amalia went, I just thought it was interesting that it didn't happen in this case. Like, maybe there's circumstances of with what, once again, we still don't know what her turn is. Either she chose not to use her turn in that particular case, but Monday, like, knocked her out, and a police officer was coming up with a knife, but it's like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to give her justice. Like, basically, we're going to go by the scenes. We're not just going to, like, murder her just because of everything she's done. It's like, we're going to do this the right way. And so inside of her cell, it's like, I'm your instrument. Why won't you play me like your instrument? So, like, once again, Melody's circumstances is still kind of like a huge mystery on that front. We had the whole situation with Annie and was it Nimble Jack? What, I don't know what you'd call that ability, like that turn. Like, he's able to make, like, Nimble's able to make, like, these, like, saucers that later on you're able to kind of walk on. Their, like, platforms are just, like, they're, like, silver things. I don't know what you'd call that necessarily, like, what that would necessarily translate of, like, it's not metal bending or anything like that, because it's, like, they come out of nowhere, but I don't know what kind of material that be considered as. But it's, like, right, like, the guy that ended up working for Melody ended up being the one to kill Mary, but also at the same time, it's like that dude that works for the Beggar King, kind of like one of his enforcers, happened to come after the widow, Amalia. It's like, nah, like, the fact is, there's more going on here. It's like, whoever it is trying to paint a picture, point you in a certain particular direction, even saying, like, don't go chasing after home dude who tried to kill Amalia. It's like, oh, he's not dead, it was just enough to knock him out, because it's like, oh, that he's kind of an idiot, and, you know, but he's a useful idiot because he helps keep the peace. But it's like, he's going to get a beating soon enough. I'm assuming, kind of suggesting, like, the Beggar King's going to, like, give him one too, because it's like, oh, like, you're doing someone else's bidding, you don't do nothing unless I tell you to. So it's probably going to turn into that. It's kind of what he was saying, like, yeah, you don't go after him, leave him alone, because he's already going to get it bad enough from the Beggar King. So Nimble takes off, and he just kind of, Annie's super fragrant about just, like, using her power. She's just like, oh, fired up, boom. Like, she's one of the few touch that's just kind of willy-nilly with using her ability. But another aspect is Amalia visiting Lord Minson, and obviously it's the whole conversation of, like, okay, like, you know, wondering whether he was involved or not, which he was saying, I wasn't, you know, sorry you kind of came here, but it's like, oh, let's, you know, just for the sake of just kind of working things out, you pretend to be the one behind everything, and I'll pretend to be Mary. And obviously it's a whole conversation of, like, you know, why would you want to kill me? But then it was like, right, you know, it's like with her hair, with her literally in a white dress and her eyes and everything, she wasn't even just a beacon. She was straight up a lighthouse. And obviously, you know, Minson's kind of saying, like, well, that's the point, like, to destroy her, because she is basically hope. And once again, he was like, if I were the one, I'd kind of suggest, like, hey, that basically there was a pestilence that came to here, you know, a couple years ago, infected. These women, they're not special or anything. They are nothing more than victims. That's like, he's kind of saying that's the role of all that they are. Like, he doesn't see them as, like, something special, as, because he actually sees them as, like, an aversion to God. Like, someone did this and is suggesting, like, this is war. And even kind of throwing Amalia under the bus, being like, you know, maybe she had an idea of what was going to come and still kind of let things play out a certain way, is kind of what he was kind of suggesting. But it's a thing of, yeah, even going back, being like, he basically admitted he did it without admitting it, but it's like, there's no point in taking him out because there's a much larger operation happening, and if he gets taken out, someone else is going to replace him. And then Penance is looking at her, and she's like, and he's a human, and his life, and it matters. damn it. And I'm like, yes, you could at least be a little more convincing, Amalia. So it's like, well, what do we do? It's like, well, we know he's got like these warheads because we saw that earlier in the episode. It's like, okay, so we'll blow that up and just like, we won't kill him, but at least we'll kind of disarm him for this war he's got planned. So they go with Bonfire and Lucy, and I love the whole thing of like they use one of Penance's devices to knock them out because it's like, yeah, I promise her we do no killing, and he's like, wow, you know, Penance might be scary, and then like Lucy's like, what were you planning to do? Give them a dandelion or something? So they split up because it's like, all right, we'll handle this. But like the moment they start getting closer and everything, like, and because I noticed it the episode, I was like, oh, Lucy's been acting a little weird because that's why because everyone was affected by Mary's death, but it's like, I was like, why did it hit you in particular really hard? And so I was like, wait, are we about to find out Lucy was? And lo and behold, because the moment she was like, yeah, open the box, I was like, oh, she knows that you're the traitor. Because she knew it had to be someone on the inside, and she's like, honestly, looking back on a lot of stuff, it makes sense. It's like, and she said something I thought was really interesting, a key clue of like, you brought up Menson's like thing for hunting and stuff like that. Only way you would know that is if you've been inside his place. And she's like, Amalia's like, I would have never picked up on it if I hadn't seen it twice. Once inside my vision, and twice when the second time when I just actually showed up at his place. So turns out Lucy was the one responsible. It's like for her, it's like she didn't know what she was doing, like when she didn't know what Menson had planned when she told him that Mary was a beginner. Like, she's like, what did you expect? And obviously there's the whole conversation of like, you know, because for her it's like, you were the first person at the orphanage who showed up. I didn't need to protect. You were actually someone I felt like I can lean on. But for Lucy, it's a situation of like, you talk all this about like war, but you don't know which war. Saying like, you know, you kind of like a thing of like, you think you know pain, but you don't understand the pain, because my child didn't die in my arms quickly like I said he did. He actually fought on, he held on, he was screaming longer than I screamed when I was in labor until his heart gave out. For her, it's like, that's the pain I have, and I've not been able to touch anyone for the past 3 years. And it's like, so kind of is a thing of like, can you really truly tell me that you understand my pain? And Amalia's kind of like, Menson was right that this is a war, and you know what happens to spies during war. She points a gun at Lucy, and she's like, are you going to kill me? You know, or are you doing this just to kind of alleviate your guilt about Mary? So that turns into a whole battle, which, I mean, hell, like, Lucy's a deadly opponent. All she has to do is touch you, and she's going to kill you. So, like, she's shattering boxes, and Amalia's doing her best to dodge her hands. I even thought that was a badass moment where, like, well, Amalia was on top of her, like, welling on her, and then she used her hands to kind of, like, rumble the concrete and kind of send something flying. So Lucy could have gotten away, but then like the pendant was so important that it's like, no, I gotta keep this. And when the time comes, Amalia doesn't pull the trigger. She's like, you are gonna get on that boat and never come back to London. You're forever, but until then you're gonna tell me where Manson's stash of weapons is. They find it, blow it up, you know, and he kind of gets to work. But obviously it's like, I didn't let her survive, you did, you know. Letting Penance remember, like, it's not because of me that she survived, it's because of you. And so when it was all said and done, obviously, it's like Amalia being like, that's why she can't get too close to the others, because it's like, for one, it's like, I hate that Lucy was right, but I can't understand your pain. Like, her circumstances are her own, and for her, it's like, it's that thing of like, you can feel sorry for someone, but you can never truly understand their pain unless you've been what they've been through. It's like, I haven't been through what Lucy's been through, like, so it's like, I don't know each and every one of your pains. I can't understand because I haven't been through what you've been through. She's got her own issues and her own struggles, but that's still her own and not theirs. So it's a situation of like, she's upset that Lucy's 100% right about that. And she's like, that's also why I can't get too close to any of them, because it's like, because of this Lucy situation is kind of proving the point. But for her, it's like, Penance being who she is why that she trusts her so much. And it's like, oh yeah, also Augie can, he's touched, and his turn is, controlling birds. And it's like, oh, could that be like why Lavinia's kind of interested in it? It's like, no, like, I think Augie's too scared to tell her, and he doesn't believe that she's aware of it. But then, like, Amalia points out, it's like, yeah, he might be too scared to tell her, but not too scared to tell you, kind of hinting at, that. And, Amalia, Penance just kind of goes back to eating the fries and chips, and just kind of, like, smiles as she kind of looks down. But then Myrtle and the others come in and pass on the message. And it turns out Mary's song was literally a message pointed to Amalia saying, like, come find us, we're in the dark. Like, basically saying you're not alone. Talking about stripes. When they said stripes, it made me think of, like a badge or something, like a medal. Like, not... kind of like military stripes, you know, or something like that. That's what it made me think of. I don't know if that's what they were implying. But it's like, wait, that message didn't come from Mary, did it? So... Mary, you know, the song, I think, played its role of kind of gathering up the touch, but that's because, like I said, whatever's possessing them, I think it resonated with them. Like I said, I think it's a being inside of them that gives them their powers. Like, I think that's what those little orbs going inside of them were. But Mary was basically translating a message to, like, because we know Lavinia found, like, the ship or whatever, and she's, like, digging it out. So it's like, oh, we're in this darkness, come find us. Essentially, like, gather up the others. And it's like, this message, this wasn't Mary talking. Something or someone was talking through her. And it seemed like Penance had an idea and was looking to Amalia. So it's like, once again, I think Penance might be the only one. Maybe Horatio that knows the truth. Maybe Malady because of her, like, mind or whatever. But that's where I am with this. Like I said, I'm probably going to end up being proven wrong. Like I said, there might even be some people being like, you idiot, there's clearer. But like I said, I would have to go back and watch. I think this series is going to be something like I need to watch as a whole to finally like kind of fill in a lot of pieces. Because there's a lot of stuff I don't get the first time through, but then like when I rewatch something, I'm like, oh, that makes much more sense. It's like now it kind of like I'll have some idea at the end of the season, but rewatching the entire season, I'll have a better understanding of things. Like with future knowledge, it adds more context, and I'll probably be a little bit more keen in understanding of what I'm seeing in the earlier episodes that kind of help fill in the gaps of some of the stuff that happens at the end. So it kind of helps, you know, come full circle and kind of fill itself out is kind of what I'm suggesting. So we'll see whether my thoughts are right or whether I'm just reading too much or thinking too much about it. But it's like, it's definitely going to be really interesting to see where all of this takes us going forward. They've exposed, you know, they've gotten rid of like the traitor amongst their main ranks, but also Amalia was like, yeah, but we don't know if Lucy's the only one. Because it's like Lord Mintz had promised to her to like, oh yeah, I will cure you. But it's like, of course he would. But it's also like, what future do we have? Like, is there really a freedom like fighting in your war, being your soldiers, and you know what's to come? Like, what's our life like? What future do we have following you, Amalia? Is kind of what Lucy was getting at. So, because even Amalia being like, if I could be anyone, I'd be Harry. I'd be you know, and it's like, yeah, the one who does the fucking cartwheels, you know. So it's like she didn't get to choose to be who she is and have what she has and be this mission being what it is. So, like I said, just a lot of complicated stuff on Amalia's plate. But I'm really interested, like I said, really interested to see where all this ends up taking us with this war against Mensa. Because it's like, yeah, they know their enemy, but obviously it's like, once again, Lavinia's kind of got her own circumstances. Also, she's working with a doctor who's lobotomizing Touch too, so it's not like she's a good person, but there's still stuff to kind of be discovered on that front, which is also going to be interesting considering, like, right, her brother's touched, and it's like, once again, does she know what the doctor's doing? I said it last episode of like, I feel like there's no way him doing what he's doing, there's no way she doesn't know, but maybe there's a possibility, hell, she doesn't even know her own brother's touch, but we'll see what that all kind of potentially will turn into. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, love light to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.